Today on the 1012 podcast, the first AP Top 25 poll of the season came out on Monday. First time AP voted Cody Nespor is going to join us to break down his poll. Plus, our good friend Kelley Ford is here to talk about the most important non-conference game for the Big 12 this season. We've got a little bit of realignment talk and some hot and bold takes from you.
Precisa ferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Raia tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Raia aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Raia, mais você se cuida.
Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We are the flagship show of the 1012 Network. Find every show in the network at 1012network.com. That's TEN, the number 12, the word network. And we are partners with Sport Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Philip Slavin. Thank you for joining us for our midweek episode. Oh, what a show we got today. Here's what's happened. I had a plan and a schedule set up leading up to the season. Once the season gets underway, we do recaps on Mondays and picks on Thursdays. And some things will change with those, and we'll get to that later. But I had a plan. I had guests lined up. I had everything we were going to go. And then I had a guest have to move, and then I had some other stuff that I had to push back here, and then I had another guest who I haven't heard back from, and then I had guests who I had reached out to in May to come on for the summer, and then they reached out to me last week, and I wasn't going to say no. And so what's happening at this point is I have too many guests lined up, which is a terrible problem to have, let me tell you, for the next few weeks. So we're going to figure out how to cram it all in. There's very, very good chance we're going to have a YouTube only episode of the show drop on our YouTube channel because I want to, why not? I'm going to probably, that's what's going to happen. So today I have a variety of topics to get to by myself. And then I have two fantastic guests joining us because of a smattering of topics and things I wanted to get to. One of those guests, Cody Nespor of the Dominion Post out of Morgantown, West Virginia. He is a first-time AP poll voter. The first AP poll of the season came out on Monday, so Cody's going to discuss where he ranked the Big 12 teams in his first poll and his thoughts on being a first-time voter in the poll this season. And then, you know him, you love him. Kelley Ford, a.k.a. K Ford Ratings on Twitter, joined us because I put out a poll about the most important non-conference game for the Big 12 this season. So we are going to discuss that topic and what the most important non-con game for the conference is coming up here in just a few weeks. So Kelley Ford, Cody Nespor coming up here in just a bit. A few things I want to get to. You know what? I want to start by saying, hey, the FCS preseason coaches poll came out. 6 Big 12 teams are going to face off against ranked FCS opponents this year. We will have a Big 12 versus FCS preview probably next week. I'm not saying the guests. I'm not going to confirm things because then things fall through. But we are going to do that because I like doing it. Everyone doesn't always tune in for it. But there's 6 ranked FCS teams facing off against Big 12s, including the 2 you guys are all aware of. Preseason number 1, South Dakota State plays Oklahoma State. Preseason number 2, North Dakota State plays Colorado. There is an FCS Big 12 game that I have circled as if there is an upset this season, this is the one it's going to be. So we will get to that soon. Like I said, the first AP poll of the season dropped on Monday. So it seems like we should go ahead and get to that first. The first AP Top 25 of the season is out. Look, we can talk about the relative or how important polls are in the preseason and their impact on things. We've got plenty of time to do that. But today, I wanted to talk with one of the voters to get their thoughts, their ballot, and I'm very excited to have here on the 1012 podcast for the first time, Cody Nespor of the Dominion Post out of Morgantown, West Virginia. Cody, welcome to the show, man.
Hi, Philip. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is your first year as an AP Top 25 voter. So I'm curious, what was the experience like for you putting your first poll together?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's really humbling, um, especially when the poll came out yesterday and I saw the list of names, and I'm kind of like, oh my God, like these are the people, these are like the big deal college reporters, and to see my name up there is very humbling. Um, in a lot of ways, I still consider myself just a guy from a small town who likes football. And to see my name up there, it didn't feel real. It doesn't feel real. I have a lot of old friends texting me like they can't believe it, and I'm like, I can't believe it either. But no, it was so exciting. I was so excited when I got asked. I was so excited when last month they kind of sent out the emails to like go ahead and start putting your polls together, and I sat down and I started doing the research, and it was um, again just so exciting, and I was so happy to do it, and I was really nervous all day Sunday because the poll was going to come out Monday, and I was super nervous, like one, how is my ballot going to stack up to everybody else's, and then how is everybody going to react to mine? But no, it's awesome. It's been an awesome experience. I'm super excited to do it for the whole year.
Look, it's good to have a few small town guys who love college football voting in the poll. We've all been there at one point or another. So, congrats, man. What was the biggest challenge that you faced this first time filling out this ballot?
Yeah. It just learning about all the other conferences. Like obviously, I feel at least I have a pretty good handle on the Big 12, but being someone who covers college football every week, I don't watch a lot of college football. Like I kind of know what happens. I watch the playoff. I watch a lot of the bowl games. But if West Virginia plays on Saturday, I'm there. So it's like I have an idea of who's good and who's not, but I don't really know. And so that was the biggest challenge of just like, okay, I know, Georgia's supposed to be the best team in the country. Okay, but well, why? Like if I go in, can I see why? And it's like Georgia, yeah, Georgia's easy. But like Penn State, where should Penn State be relative to everybody else? And it's like, can I go in and look at their stats and watch some of their clips and determine myself I think I had them at 11. Yeah. And it was that kind of stuff where like, okay, like, I've really got to know, I can't just say, oh yeah, I know Missouri was pretty good last year. It's like, no, I've got to, okay, Missouri was really good, and here's what they did in the offseason, and here's how they look for this year, right? But I had to do that for everybody. And that was the hardest thing. 'Cause like I said, I got a pretty good handle on the Big 12 schools. Um, but that's what, 1/5 of the country, less.
Well, I mean, now it's gotten significantly bigger. As someone who also covers the Big 12, we've got four schools in their sophomore seasons and four brand new schools. I mean, yeah, Colorado's part of the Big 12, more than a decade ago, but it's been a minute since they've been around. What is the challenges that you feel heading into the season, or the excitement? What about this new 16-team Big 12 is the thing that is most like on your mind?
So the biggest thing for me is 16 teams, 8 of them are in their first or second year, and 8 of them are, the holdovers. So I just like that's a lot. Like there's none of the other Power Four conferences are like that, right? Because the other three they added some, but it's not half the conference. And so that's the big thing for me is like these 8 schools that were added this year and last year, like they could pretty significantly change the dynamic of the Big 12, if things go a certain way. Like, who's Utah and Arizona and let's, UCF, maybe they come in and just become the top dogs in the conference, right? And all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's like, oh, Oklahoma State isn't as important anymore, and Kansas State isn't as important anymore. Or even just like what if all these Pac-12 schools come in and they're all going to run air raid again, and we're right back to the score 50 points every game kind of Big 12, right? And it's like there's 8 new, half the conference is new. The 4 schools were in last year, but half the conference is new, right? And so that's exciting to me, not just this year, but going forward is like it could pretty significantly shift the perception, the dynamics, the hierarchy of the conference in a way that isn't going to happen in the other three power conferences.
Yeah, it's as if the Conference of Chaos wasn't chaotic enough.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like, but you know what? It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. All right, so I want to kind of talk about your particular bracket or your poll and some of the Big 12 teams in it. We'll start with Arizona because you look at the breakdown. It's like highest vote, number 8, Cody Nespor. There's your name right there. You're the guy people are going to come at and be like, how could you put Arizona at number 8? 13 people didn't even rank them. They're actually 21st in the poll. Why are you so much higher on Arizona this season than everybody else?
So one, I was shocked. I'm the only person that had him in the top 10, and I think the next highest was in the teens, in the upper teens. So that shocked me. And here's how I kind of approached doing the poll is I wanted to take teams that had good years last year and maybe even overachieved last year, and then had a good offseason, and then I wanted to reward them on the ballot. And Arizona had a good year last year. They had a really good year last year. They had a coaching change, which could have been catastrophic, but it wasn't. I thought they had a good offseason, right? They keep the quarterback, they keep the dog wide receiver. And so I think it's a good offseason. They got some guys out of the portal. They lost some guys in the portal, but they got some good guys in the portal. And they got a good coach. And so I wanted to reward them. They finished at 11 last year. And to me, rewarding them was bumping them up to 8. Obviously, nobody else who voted really thought like that. I do think maybe coaching change, maybe in hindsight for me, that I should have considered that more. But in my mind, like, they got a good coach and they had a good offseason. So I would be more surprised if the bottom fell out on them and they were not as good as last year than if they were better than last year. And again, they finished at 11 last year. So it's not like, I didn't feel like I was making this big projected jump for them. I bumped them up 3 spots from where they finished because I thought they had a good offseason. And that's, if you go through my whole poll, you could kind of see that of like teams that did well last year and had good offseasons, I rewarded. Teams that maybe had a good year and then had a rough offseason, I bumped them down. And I'll go, the one big omission from my list is Miami, who I think was 19. And I don't have them on. They didn't have a good year. They had a good offseason, but they always have a good offseason. They're Miami, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But that's how I approached it. I think differently than it seems like everybody else approached it. Of, how do you couple the year with the offseason? Which, Miami might be a top 25 team. They certainly weren't last year. And I'm not gonna, they haven't been. So, it's I tried not to give anybody the benefit of the doubt, other than probably Georgia.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, but that's how I looked at it. And the other thing is, like, since it's the preseason poll, I wasn't too concerned about being right. Because it's like, I don't know, I mean, we're guessing, nobody's played a game. And so if I guess Arizona's going to be really good and they're not, does that make, I don't think that says something bad about me. I think that just says I was higher on them than other people were.
And as the season goes, adjustments will be made. Yeah, you were 8 spots higher than the next voter who had them at 16.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as week 1 is played, we'll know infinitely more than we do right now.
In theory, there's a lot. I think we have a lot of Big 12 FCS games in week 1. But the point is there. You have Utah dead on at number 12. They are number 12 in the poll. Oklahoma State at 13. They were number 17th. You are not Steven Johnson, who's the only person to not rate Oklahoma State. TCU beat writer didn't rank Oklahoma State. A couple other ones I want to hit on the Big 12. Kansas State, you have them 19. They were 18. Chip Towers, name drop for the guy who didn't rank Kansas State. That one, a little bit baffling. West Virginia, you have Kansas at 23. They actually are ranked 22nd. You have West Virginia in at 24. You're not the highest on West Virginia, so no one gets to call you the homer. That's Jordan Kramer. actually would fall 33rd based off the number of points they actually received. You are one of the few voters who put West Virginia in your poll. I mean, some are going to say, well, you cover West Virginia, so there's some bias. Help me here on West Virginia in your top 25.
Yeah. So it's right back to what I was just talking about. They had a good season. They had a good offseason. So I rewarded them, right? In how I got kind of my bulk like of the list was I looked at every power conference team that won 10 games and every power conference team that won 9 games. And, I went through, do any of these guys drop out? And like Washington, obviously, is going to drop out. And I dropped Iowa out because, who knows about Iowa? Um, but I looked at that was that group of teams. I think it ended up being 20 or 21 or 22. And I went through those ones first. I said, are these guys locks? And a lot of them were locks. And one of those was West Virginia because they won 9 games. And they played 11 power conference opponents, right? They played one FCS and 11, and they won 9 games. Well, they played, including the bowl game, they played 12 power conference opponents and won 9 games. And they had a good offseason, right? Like the quarterback's back, just all the offensive weapons are back. And then they brought in all the transfers on defense. And I think 24 is fair. Obviously, that's where I put them. So that's what I think. But it's like, how do you take a team that won 9 games, had a good offseason, and don't put them in, right? Like I don't have my notes there in the newsroom, but I don't think I had a situation like that where a team other than Washington, which they had issues this offseason, they lost everything, and Iowa, who I don't want to touch Iowa. But other than that, I don't think there's a power conference team that won 9 or 10 games last year that I don't have ranked. Because that's what I think is fair, and that's why I put West Virginia in, and that's why I'm surprised more people didn't have West Virginia. I don't want to pick on Miami, but to go back to Miami, it's like, why is Miami ranked at 19? They had a worse season than West Virginia in maybe a weaker conference, maybe. And yeah, they had a good offseason, but like, do you rank a team 19 just because they had a good offseason? We've never seen this version of Miami play. We don't, but again, it's just guessing. So it's like, I'm not going to bash anybody for guessing because I'm guessing too. But that's like I said, that was my process, and that's why West Virginia landed where it did. And that's why Kansas landed where it did. They won 9 games too, with their backup quarterback. And so their big offseason was just getting Jalen Daniels healthy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why those two land there. And the same with the other Big 12 schools. It's like all those teams had good season. Utah was down, but they had a quarterback carousel, so I didn't fault them too much for that. But that's all the Big 12 teams. They had good seasons and they had good off seasons, and so I like I said, rewarded them for it.
I like the mindset. I again, like if anybody's getting like angry about preseason polls, like it's a preseason poll.
Yeah.
Like it's supposed to be fun. Yes,
Yeah.
I think sometimes it has too much impact on the mindset of teams as we get into the season, even though it's not supposed to, but save that for another day. Cody, I want to wrap up on this. Of the Big 12 teams that you have in here, like I said, Arizona at 8, Utah at 12, Oklahoma State at 13, Kansas State at 19, Kansas at 23, and West Virginia at 24. You wanted to reward the teams. I like the mindset. I think everyone can take their own angle into the first poll of the preseason. Of the teams in the Big 12 you've ranked, and you can include the ones you haven't, yeah. Is there a team that you feel, based off your expectations or opinion of the teams heading into the season, that will be the biggest either riser or dropper by the time we're at the end of the year, based off where you would have them ranked today?
I probably Utah. I'm skittish about a quarterback that is coming back from pretty major injury. But he's a really good quarterback, right? And Utah's a really good team. So I wouldn't be surprised if Utah ends up a top 10 team, and wins the conference. I also probably wouldn't be surprised if Utah had quarterback issues again. If Cam Rising isn't healthy or if he's not, back to where he was. I think they could struggle again without a good quarterback because a lot of the top Big 12 teams have good quarterbacks. And the other one, just because I'm so high, I'm probably Arizona. If Arizona ends up kind of middling it's like, okay, well, you like maybe the coaching change was a big deal. Maybe the guys I lost in the portal was a bigger deal than I kind of think it will be. And I don't mean to pick two newcomers. Let me Kansas. I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Daniels is healthy the whole year. I wouldn't be surprised if they're really, really good. The problem is I don't think he's ever had a fully healthy year, unfortunately. And then UCF, I think UCF has a lot of talent. It's just, the jump up to the Big 12 was obviously too much for them last year, just having to do it every week. But I do, of the four newcomers from last year, they're definitely the most talented, and they're probably more talented than Arizona State and Colorado. So I could see them. If they were really good this year, that wouldn't really surprise me either.
Cody, I appreciate it, man. This was a lot of fun. We're going to have to talk throughout the season as you go through your first year as an AP voter, and you're a Heisman Trophy voter. So,
yes.
Man, is this your first year as a Heisman Trophy voter too?
No, last year was.
Okay. Well, we won't ask you about that till we get closer to. Cody, where can everybody check out the work you do covering West Virginia and the Big 12?
Yeah. So I'm easy. I'm on Twitter, just Cody Nespor, and then DominionPost.com.
Appreciate it, Cody.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks again to Cody for hopping on the show. Really appreciate it. We will try and have him back on throughout the season as he continues to be an AP Top 25 voter. We are going to do a little realignment talk here. And I know I don't typically talk realignment on this show. There are other places you can go that talk realignment a lot, that do a far better job of it than I do. John Kurtz, who covers the Big 12 and realignment a lot on his show on YouTube. That is one place I would go. I would look at Locked On Big 12. They cover it a lot over there as well. So if you want a lot of realignment coverage, those are two great Big 12 shows that I would suggest you go and check out. Look, I love all Big 12 shows, okay? We are a community here. We are a community that is loyal to each other. Big 12 fans are the most online of any power conference. We are smart, and we care about this conference and about college football. I'm going to get to this real quick. I just want to talk about this particular topic because Kyle Whittingham discussed realignment a bit in a recent interview with John Canzano. I'm going to read this straight from Canzano's article. The question was, you've talked about the future of major college football. That a line will be drawn in the sand and that Utah needs to be on the right side of the line. When is that coming? How many teams will it include? And what do you see? I'm going to read you Kyle Whittingham's response. He is, of course, the head coach of the Utah Utes. His response was, and I quote, "Well, yeah, I think there's a major realignment coming, and it'll be a big one. I think it'll create even more of a divide and exclusivity for the teams that are on the right side of that line. 20 months to 4 years? How about that for a time frame? In my opinion, it's going to look very much like an NFL minor league." I'm going to pause here for a second. That's in line with what everyone thinks is going to happen. The English Premier League model, kind of like one of those situations, right? That's the kind of stuff that we have seen talked about a lot in relation to a splitting off of a collection of teams. Back to Whittingham's quote, I see an expansion of the playoff with that to 16 teams. The short version is super conferences. I think it's going to be, or to boil down to 40 to 60 maybe teams in the super conference. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't play anybody but other super conference teams. Make that as a division as far as who you play. Like I said, a full-blown playoff. Whether or not the players will be employees officially remains to be seen, but I think that's very likely. I think that's where it's headed. End quote. I know this sounds crazy to hear a coach say all this. Number one, we don't know how much longer Whittingham is going to be the head coach at Utah. They've named a successor when he finally steps down. The current defensive coordinator is the incumbent, or what's the term? Coach in waiting? Yeah. We all know how well those go here in the Big 12, right? He's made comments like this in the past. This isn't the first time he's said something like this. So he's been on this kind of stump for a while. Other coaches and other people have talked about this. This isn't that outlandish. Like, people wanted to respond as negative towards Utah, him saying this. And I'm like, this is pretty much what we've been hearing from people for a while. And I think people understand this because A, you can kind of see it going that direction. And B, I think that's what the people who are air quotes in charge and kind of running things, TV networks, Greg Sankey, want for this sport. I don't know who's going to end up on the air quotes right side and who's going to end up left behind. If this is the future of things, that's fine. Let's just get there. Because I do think those air quotes left behind, I think things will get a little bit different and it'll be a little bit tough because you won't have the money. But college football especially will probably start to look more like it used to with a little more regionality and smaller conferences and things that we say that we miss about college football. So the negativity toward him saying this stuff and towards Utah because he's trying to say that Utah should be on the right side and yada, yada, yada. What do you expect him to say? I got no problem with this or any interview he's given about this topic. I don't think there's anything in here that's just like mind-blowing. 20 months to 4 years, that line, I don't know. That seems awful soon. Do we ever see anything in college football move quickly? Like, I know it's moving quicker now than it ever has before, but it still feels like it's at a glacier pace. Maybe that's because we talk about this stuff ad nauseum every single day. Right? Maybe because there's just constant coverage of this stuff every single day. It feels slow. And maybe it is moving a lot faster than it used to. But it's still like, you're still dragging the sport and those in charge in the NCAA kicking and screaming along into progress. So, okay, enough realignment talk. I did ask for some hot takes and bold predictions on Twitter and X. And I wanted to read a few of the ones that we got. One of those was from Andrew McCleary, who covers Texas Tech for Last Word on CFB. He said, Taj Brooks will lead the conference in rushing yards. That's not that crazy of a take. It's not that bold of a take. This is the year of the running back. There are a ton of good running backs in the Big 12. It is fairly likely that the best running back in the Big 12 doesn't lead the conference in yards. This is not a statement of who the best running back in the Big 12 is. This is if you told me that R.J. Harvey is actually the best running back in the Big 12, I would say, okay, I'll listen to that argument. He's not going to lead the conference in rushing yards because he's got Penny Boone. If you say DJ Giddens is actually the best running back in the Big 12, I'm going to say, okay, that's fine if you want to make that argument. I don't think he's going to lead the Big 12 in rushing because they also have Dylan Edwards. I think that Trey Sanders is going to be solid for TCU. I think Abu Sama is going to be solid for Iowa State. I think that Corey Kinner and Evan Pryor will be good for Cincinnati. LJ Martin should be good for BYU. I'm intrigued by Cameron Scadaboo at Arizona State. If you told me that Jaheim White's the best running back in the Big 12, I would say, oh, okay, I'll listen to the argument, but he's not going to lead the Big 12 in rushing because CJ Donaldson's there. Where the running back who leads the conference in rushing yards is going to come is from a backfield where you have a stud and then some guys behind him, some Jags. Not R.J. Harvey and Penny Boone. Not C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White. Not DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards. Not even Devin Neal and Daniel Hishaw. And I don't think Corey Kinner and Evan Pryor. I think it is way more likely we see someone like a Scadaboo, who I don't think it'll be because I don't think their offensive line's going to be good enough. A LJ Martin, who I don't think it'll be because I don't think BYU's offensive line will be good enough. A Ollie Gordon again. A Taj Brooks. Somewhere that the leader's going to get plenty of opportunities and is going to be good and is going to be behind a good offensive line, but doesn't have someone there behind him. And don't get me wrong, like Cameron Valdez is a nice running back behind Taj Brooks. But Taj Brooks is going to be very, very important to that offense, especially if Baron Morton isn't 100% healthy. So I would not be shocked if Taj Brooks leads the Big 12 in rushing yards. Our friends at Scott and Holman podcast said, quote, Baylor's being entirely too overhyped for the addition of a MAC quarterback and an OC who hasn't overseen an above-average offense since 2018. Is Baylor being overhyped? Is this a team where everyone's like, yeah, Baylor, this is the year for them? Like, Dave Aranda's on the hot seat. He's on a very hot seat. Now, he could coach himself off of the hot seat this year, but he's on the hot seat. I struggle with this one, fellas, because I just don't see how they're being overhyped. And we're still hearing about DeQuan Finn, as they mentioned, the MAC quarterback, and Sawyer Robinson in a quarterback battle. Now, we all expect DeQuan Finn to get the starting job, the nod for Baylor, over Sawyer Robertson. But like, and I think he's going to be solid for them. But like, I don't like their running back duo. I'm not super pumped about Dominic Richardson and Dawson Pendergrass. The receivers could be solid. Like the defense could be good again or better again this year. But like, I don't know who's overhyping Baylor. Like saying that Baylor's overhyped means you think they're going to finish in last place and they're being too high, being picked. What were they in the eighth in the preseason poll, ninth, something like that. I don't know, fellas. I don't know. I'm even most Baylor fans that I follow, like our show, the Bear Den podcast, our friends over at Between Two Bears, everyone over at Oso Media, like the people at Sikkim. Like I don't see anybody who's even like Baylor media that's like, no, this season you're gonna make it to Arlington. Most of them are like, can we get a bowl game? Like, are we gonna are we gonna have a new head coach next year? Like I don't understand the overhype thing. Patrick Sammons said that West Virginia will be in the Big 12 title game. Not a bold. I asked for bold statements here, folks. I mean, the Baylor one is, I guess, bold because I don't think they're overhyped. Because I don't think anyone's hyping them up that much. Taj Brooks is not a bold take. West Virginia in the Big 12 title game. This is the Big 12, folks. Andy Staples of On3 put out his 16-team playoff bracket, and the two Big 12 reps, and he had two. Maybe that was bold that he had two. Were UCF and West Virginia. West Virginia is in the mix based off of the preseason for teams that could be in Arlington. I like Garrett Green. I just mentioned the two running backs. Maybe the defense is good. I still think it's going to have one of the better offensive lines in the Big 12. Like I'm curious about the wide receiving core, but like if you told me West Virginia made it to Arlington, it would knock my socks off and we'd be like, wow, I can't believe this has happened. Right? That's not that hot of a take. I don't think. I understand that everyone's picking like Kansas State and Utah. They're talking about Oklahoma State and Kansas and Arizona. And so West Virginia has still been a little bit of also in the mixed team. They're not getting named. But I'm not going to be shocked if they're in Arlington. This is the Big 12, folks. Okay? Anything can happen. Anything in the Big 12 can happen, except Iowa State winning 10 games. Our friend Scott, host of the Kansas State show, Bosco's Boys, part of the 10-12 network as well, said Kansas and Iowa State combined for 7 or fewer conference wins. Scott just likes to mess with Kansas and Iowa State fans. That is the boldest take in here. Now, let's say Jalen Daniels goes down in week 2 for Kansas. I could see them struggling. I could see that team struggling. Bean ain't there anymore, folks. I don't want to hear about the backup quarterback. Jason Bean ain't there. If Jalen Daniels can't play for this season, we're going to see what the future of Kansas looks like. But that probably won't be pretty this year. Iowa State, like to me, this is if Jalen Daniels gets hurt early and then they just struggle and Iowa State's got 6 of those 7 conference wins, like sure. Scott, it's a bold take. It is. It absolutely is. That's the boldest one. We saved the boldest one for last. Speaking of 10-12 network shows, if you haven't yet, go check out our Utah show. We have a Utah show now, Utah Utes Football Digest. Joseph is the host. It is our only YouTube-only show. He's got some new episodes out. He is doing an incredible job. An absolutely incredible job. And I am thrilled to have him in the network. Look, I think Big 12 fans are smart. I understand Big 12 fans who don't like Utah, and no argument. I get all that, blah, 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 blah. But I think Big 12 fans are smart because I think Big 12 fans listen. I think they pay attention. I think they are well educated on this conference. I think they're well educated on the other teams in this conference besides just their own. If you are one of those fans who is well educated and likes to stay up and likes to be in the know, especially heading into the season, you need to be checking out every show at the 10-12 network, but you need to go, especially with these 4 new teams coming in, and check out Utah Utes Football Digest on YouTube. Joseph does a great job. It's going to get you up to date on YouTube, on Utah. You're going to learn a lot. And also, man, I'm psyched for this. We're going to have an Arizona State show. The Forkcast. Yes, it's the Forkcast, right? Forks up. It's also a joke off Anchorman Fight when throws a Trident. Ralph Amsden is going to be the host of that show. If you have been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard Ralph Amsden here on the show. He is an Arizona State alum who's covered Arizona State for a long time. He does Arizona State Sun Devil Twitter Spaces about once a week. He has covered the Pac-12 for a very long time. He is someone I have been going to for Arizona State and Pac-12 information since it was announced that those schools were joining the Big 12. He is a guy he is the first person I circled of the, like, we need shows for we're incoming. I want Ralph hosting our Arizona State show. And it is happening. The forecast is coming. First episode should be dropping soon. Just keep an eye out for that. But Ralph does, I am not kidding. When Ralph was the guy I had to have in the network, and we are getting him, and I am thrilled about that. He does a great job covering Arizona State. He knows the other three schools well. I am thrilled to have him. I am thrilled to have Joseph. They are two great additions, two great shows added to this network to continue to grow it. The goal has always been and always will be 16 schools covered, every school with a show. Every school with a show. I say show, not podcast, because again, Utah Utes Football Digest, not a podcast. It is a show on YouTube. At this point, the only schools in the conference we do not have a dedicated show for are Arizona, Colorado, and TCU. I have no idea what I'm going to do about TCU. I've had two TCU shows, and both have had to go for various reasons. They are a struggle. If you are a TCU fan, or you know of a TCU show, or you know somebody you think would make a great TCU show host, let me know. I will work on Colorado and Arizona. At this point, that's probably more of a like January, February kind of thing. But then we've got 13 of 16 teams covered. You can find all of them. Plus, we've got a wrestling show. We've got a Twitter live show, Big 12 After Dark. We have the basketball show is kind of on hiatus right now, so just kind of ignore that. But go to 1012network.com, TEN 12 network.com. Check all of our shows out. You'll find links to all of them. I love everyone in this network. I love all the people that have joined us. We've got so many good shows. I've name dropped some already. Go to the website and check that out. A couple last notes here before we get to our good friend Kelley Ford. We've got 8 first-time matchups in the Big 12 this year. 8 first-time matchups. 8 matchups that have never been played in college football before. This year. We got 4 more in 25. This year you get Arizona, West Virginia, Arizona, UCF, Arizona State, Kansas, Colorado, UCF, Iowa State, UCF, Iowa State, Houston, Utah, UCF, and UCF, TCU. You notice a lot of UCF in there. I'm excited for all of these. Like, first time match, 8 games this season, 5 of which involve UCF. Yes, UCF, Arizona, UCF, Colorado, UCF, Iowa State, UCF, Utah, and UCF, TCU. Yeah, 5 of 8 involve UCF. I don't know which one I'm more excited. Oh, yeah, I do know. It's Iowa State, UCF. Could we just call it the Cyclone Larry Bowl? Is that what we call it? Like, 2 fan bases that have been at it on social media? Oh, I can't wait. UCF coverage from us, Sons of UCF. They do a live on YouTube every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Orlando time. So if you're listening to this on Thursday, go check them out on YouTube. And for Iowa State, we've got Wide Right Natty Light, which has a bunch of different shows. So go subscribe to them on wherever podcasts are available. And they've got lots of different shows that pop into their channel. So speaking of lots of different things, Charlie Hustle, official sponsors here on the 1012 podcast and of the entire 1012 network, and deep fans of the Big 12, just like us. They love the Big 12. That's why they have so much Big 12 stuff. If you have not seen the Big 12 mascot shirt, I got mine. It is incredible. They're not sold out yet, so you need to hurry and get one. They've also got sweaters with all the mascots because they love the Big 12, and they want every Big 12 fan to be the best dressed this season with their wide selection of officially licensed and super, super comfortable collegiate apparel. They've got all 16 schools in the Big 12. All of them. Every single one, because they just added Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State this summer. They already had Colorado gear. They've put out so much good stuff already this summer. There is more stuff coming as we get into the season. So what you need to remember is our promo code 101215, TEN1215, for 15% off all non-sale items. Okay? I didn't say first time, I said all non-sale items. Use that code every time you shop. They've got more than 30 schools to choose from, including all the Big 12 schools. They've got you covered with all your collegiate apparel needs, especially if you're a Big 12 fan. Okay? They've got tons of good stuff on sale, too. They're clearing out some old Big 12 gear to make room for new. A bunch of good basketball stuff you could go buy now and have ready for the start of basketball season. Just great stuff. Great Letterman jackets. They've got sweatpants for like Iowa State, Kansas State. Oh, man, guys, just go to charliehustle.com. Use that promo code 101215 for 15% off all non-sale items. Again, that's charliehustle.com. Promo code 101215, 15% off all non-sale items. Charlie Hustle, Vintage Made Fresh. Thank you to them for sponsoring this show. Thank you to them for sponsoring everyone in this network. Thank you to and actually, like, our Kansas State, Bosco's Boys and Scott and Holman podcast both have their own individual deals with Scott and Holman, with Charlie Hustle. So, like, they've got their own promo code. Because we all do it, because we all love Charlie Hustle, because they love the Big 12. I'm going to support things that support the Big 12. By the way, I really want, like, a snack and an alcohol sponsor here, and a hat sponsor. Oh, that's too many sponsors to have. Maybe we'll have a new gambling sponsor this year. I don't know. I don't know if we'll do Prize Picks again or not. But, you know, if you guys know anybody, if you're a company that sells snacks and you listen to this, you're like, hey, guys, we would be really cool to have a bunch of Big 12 shows sponsoring us. Or you're a brewery or a distillery that serves and promotes a Big 12 school, let me know. Email is 1012podcast@gmail.com, 1012 Network on Twitter and on Threads. All right. Like I said, what's the most important game or non-conference game for the Big 12 this season? We're going to debate that very topic with our good friend, Kelley Ford, right now. We put out a poll on Twitter, X, Twix, whatever, last week, and asked the question, what is the most important non-conference game for the Big 12 this season? Now, when you put out a Twitter poll, you only have 4 options. So I did West Virginia, Penn State, UCF, Florida, Colorado, Nebraska, obviously matchups with P5 teams. I put Colorado, Nebraska in there. I don't actually think it's one of them, but I did. And then, of course, there was the other. And look, West Virginia, Penn State won the poll overwhelmingly, 54%. But I did get some interesting replies that were not included. You never know with stuff like this. You put something in the replies. Sometimes people reply. Sometimes people are just like, you get like 20% other, but then no one says anything. You're like, thanks for that. That was really helpful. Among the people who replied was our good friend, Kelley Ford, K4 Ratings, as we all know him. And so I said, hey, this is a fun conversation. Kelley obviously has thoughts. Let's get him back on the pod and have this. So Kelley Ford, back on the 1012 podcast. Welcome back, my friend.
Thanks, Philip. It feels like home. I love coming on with you. I love engaging with you, whether that's on social media, offline, before we do the podcast, or on the podcast. It's always a good time. So thanks so much for having me. And this is a great topic. I'm looking forward to it.
I've had this thought in my head, and you and I have kind of talked about this in the off season of like, I don't want to complain about college football. I'm not going to be like, I hate, this is a terrible week. This is the week to go to a wedding or da-da-da. And I'm not getting into the like college fall wedding conversations on Twitter right now. I'm not doing it. And I'm like, I don't want to be that way, because all college football is good college football. Like, if you're a college football fan, if you're a fan of a team, then that's fine. But if you are a fan of college football, then you're excited for action in the middle of the week, and you're excited for whatever comes on Thursday, Friday. You're happy to stay up. Like Washington State, Texas Tech, which we might talk about. It's going to be like a 9 p.m. God's time kickoff. You could bet I'm going to stay up for that as late as I possibly can. But for the Big 12, the slate's not the most just like, look at these bangers, right? The kids still said bangers. I don't know. But so it led me to think like, okay, so what are the most important, right? Important, not just like marquee or matchups. Like, what are the important non-conference games? Because non-conference, you play 3 of them, and they do impact your conference's reputation once you start getting into conference play. Obviously, the preseason polls matter and that stuff too. Whether they should or not, we could set all that aside. We don't have that conversation right now. But non-conference matchups help determine early season opinions on teams, which can sometimes be hard to get rid of. So that led me to, what is the most important non-conference game? And Kelley, you, along with quite a few other people in the replies, didn't pick a game that I thought of You went with Arizona, Kansas State. You were not the only one. There were a lot of Kansas State fans who said the same thing. Help me here, because I disagree, but I need you to explain your thought process here first.
So there's a few different ways we can go about talking about what are the most important, right? Quote unquote. You can define that in a few different ways. So it depends on how you want to define that. For me, I try to just take a holistic approach. And the games that you listed, Philip, are all top 10 games in the non-conference for me in the Big 12 this season. You said maybe even Colorado, Nebraska isn't quite even in that group for you. These are certainly all the ones you listed, top 10, easily, maybe even top 5. But the number one game that stood out to me, and it's a little bit, you have to think about it for a second, because it's two Big 12 teams, but it's a non-conference game, Arizona at Kansas State. Of course, this is a return game from a home and home that was previously scheduled before Arizona announced their move to the Big 12. To me, this is the most important game in the non-conference because it's two of the, what do you want to call it, 3 or top 4 contenders for spots in Arlington. Like Kansas State, for me, is the favorite. Them and Utah, they're very, very close, but those two teams are 1 and 2 in my projected conference standings right now. So Kansas State certainly in that group. Arizona's in that kind of next group of Kansas, Arizona, Oklahoma State. That's probably who I'd put there. And then there's another 5 or 6 teams right after that who are all in the mix as well. But when you've got a non-conference game between two teams that are projecting to be in the top 2, 3, 4 of the conference standings at the end of the year, to me, that catches my eye. And that really sets the stage for the winner of this game, because these two teams, from a power rating standpoint, I have Kansas State right now at number 19, Arizona's number 25. So from a power rating standpoint, this is going to be a quality win, a pretty good win for either one of these teams that gets it. And from the loss standpoint, it's not a, quote, bad loss, right? Like when you lose to a top 25 power rated team, that's almost to be expected. A lot of teams in the country are going to lose to teams power rated in the top 25. So it's almost like a house money game. There's a lot to gain. There's very little to lose, especially when you consider the team that does lose, it doesn't count in the conference standings, right? That's the whole reason we're talking about it in this segment. So to me, that's why you have a chance to put a good win on your resume early in the year to really test and gauge yourself. Where are we relative to another contender for a spot in Arlington in our conference championship game? And those conference championship games this year, many would argue, are more important than they've been in a long time, Philip, because it is 99.9% sure that the winner of that game in Arlington is going to not just make the playoff, but get a top 4 seed and a home game, a bye, and then play a neutral site game in the quarters. That's really, really important. So I think the winner of this game kind of knows where they are. The loser of this game knows where they are and what they need to work on before entering then conference play the very next week. Because that's another thing that's intriguing about this game. It's not week 1. Each of these teams has 2 games before that, and Kansas State's got a tricky trip to Tulane. Let's not forget about that in week 2. But they've got 2 games before this to get themselves up and ready for this week 3 game, and then for the vast majority of teams in the Big 12, starting conference play then in week 4. That is why I went Arizona, Kansas State. Certainly there are others, but there was my rationale for that one. And again, it's a little counterintuitive because they are 2 Big 12 teams, so it's just a unique circumstance this year. Baylor and Utah have a similar situation, as all the listeners probably know.
So here's my concern. And when I went with most important, maybe that wasn't the best way to word it, but that's the wording that came to mind. Is maybe I should have said most impactful, because if West Virginia loses to Penn State, it's not going to hurt the reputation of West Virginia. It's not going to hurt the reputation of the Big 12, because West Virginia is not expected to win that game, right? If they win that game, it completely changes a lot of things, both for expectations for West Virginia and for the Big 12, because West Virginia is in the conference. The reason I struggle with the Kansas State, Arizona, I completely understand all the conversation about how good these teams are expected to be, the metrics they're going to play in this. This is not a bad loss. This is a good win, right? I don't trust national college football media, and I'm not sure I trust the selection committee who will decide seeding and so on and so forth, and people who handle rankings on a weekly basis, to give the winner of that game enough credit for being because it's going to be 2 Big 12 teams. And I'm afraid that all it's going to end up being is an additional loss, same problem with Utah Baylor, on Big 12 resumes, because 2 conference teams played, and you're not going to get the credit for it you should, because it's 2 conference teams. Even though it was a non-conference game, even though you could have Arizona and Kansas State in Arlington playing again in a championship in the championship game. That's fine. It's just I don't trust that the winner of that game will be given enough credit because it's two conference teams. Whereas when you go and beat a team from the SEC or the Big Ten, you're going to get more credit. Even if it's a mid-tier Big Ten or SEC team, you're not going to get the credit. If, let's say, Arizona has a really good season and Kansas State beats them, will Kansas State be given the credit they're due? I don't think they will be given enough credit because it was a Big 12 team.
I completely understand that viewpoint. It makes total sense. And with that mindset, looking at this problem through that lens, I would agree with you that the most impactful game, potentially, like the one that has the potential to be the most impactful, is West Virginia at home in week 1 against Penn State, which actually, Philip, of any non-conference Big 12 game, that is the game that has the highest watchability score. In my watchability metric, 9.4. The Kansas State Arizona is 9.2. So it is the highest watchability score of any Big 12 non-conference game. It's number 3 in watchability in week 1, which has some really, really good games at the top. And then it lacks a little bit of depth. Like you said, we're not going to complain about it. We've been waiting all summer, but there's some really elite games in week 1. West Virginia, Penn State is one of those. And using that logic, Philip, I'm gonna play off of that with some of these other big games. I am not sure that UCF at Florida in week 6, I think that might have the same problem as you've outlined as Arizona, Kansas State. Here's why. Florida's a really, really good team. They're number 22 in my power ratings, and they're an SEC team. And yet, like you said, the national media, the committee, all these people, they're going to look kindly upon a win against an SEC team. But because Florida's schedule is so difficult, and part of that's because they have to play UCF. That's one of these difficult games. Because it's so difficult, what if Florida goes 6-6, which is kind of what my numbers are projecting? If UCF beats Florida and they're in Florida 6-6, people will say, "Oh yeah, Florida's 6-6." That's not fair. That's not fair to UCF. It's not fair to Florida. But using your line of logic there, I think that game would fall into that as well. You could say the same thing about Oklahoma State and Arkansas. Arkansas is number 42 in the power rating. It's got an 8.5 watchability score. That's an SEC team. It's a home game for Oklahoma State. They're going to be rocking there in Stillwater, I would imagine. That might be a similar situation where if Arkansas ends the year with a sub 500 record, which is probable, I would say at this point, certainly a possibility, if not probable, they might not get enough credit, quote unquote, for that. Some ones that are flying under the radar maybe a little bit is, what if Kansas State, gets that win at Utah, or excuse me, that win at Tulane, and then Tulane ends up being that new year, or the CFP non-power 4, the group of 5 AQ. Well, now Kansas State has a win over a CFP team, because a lot of people think Tulane might be that team. My numbers support that as well, giving Tulane a good chance. So there's one that could be impactful at the end of the year that we don't necessarily think of. How about TCU at SMU? SMU's got a very favorable schedule this year. I know it's their first year in the ACC. I know they're taking a quote step up in competition into a Power 4 conference, but they're a dark horse in that conference because of the schedule that they play. So if TCU gets a win on their resume against a team in SMU who maybe they find their way to Charlotte, and even if they don't win the ACC championship, TCU's got a win on their resume of, hey, a team that played for the ACC championship. Iowa State, of course, that game is huge. People love it. It scores highly in the watchability, and a lot of people say, Kelley, you can't call Iowa watchable. Some would say Iowa State, but I think most would say you can't call Iowa watchable. These are two good teams for me, power rated, in the top 30, 35. That could go either way, because Iowa, they're going to be favored in a lot of games this year. I have them favored right now in 11 games, Iowa. But they're a single-digit favorite, or a one-possession favorite in like 7 of those. So if Iowa doesn't have a good record in one-score games this year, that win that Iowa State presumably might get here in week 2, that might not look as good at the end of the year as it would have in a year where Iowa was still playing in the Big Ten West and maybe had a chance to make it to Indianapolis, right? So using your lens, Philip, I think that's really, really good. Using that, you can kind of pick apart each of these other games that might be considered high profile, but because of the perception of the opponent, through no fault of their own, but the schedule they play, the conference they're in, whatever it is, it could benefit or harm the Big 12 team in that sense. Man, that's why I love this kind of conversation.
Isn't it fun? Isn't it great? Look, El Assico, Iowa State, was mentioned quite a few times in the replies. There was one BYU fan that said, quote, BYU needs to shut SMU the bleep up. That's the most important non-con game to me. And look, SMU fans on Twitter have been very vocal. Getting invited to the ACC because they were willing to come and not get paid seems to have made SMU fans feel very confident about their team. It's kind of like the guy who, look, It's kind of like the guy who sits at the very end of the bench on the championship roster who didn't actually play a single minute during the season. But hey, he got a ring too, okay? He got a ring too. Looking at this, I want to talk about your watchability scale real quick. You run through your top 10 Big 12 for me in non-con.
So the games, let me do this. 9.4 for West Virginia, Penn State. 9.2, like I said, for Kansas State, Arizona. And then after that, 8.9 is UCF, Florida. 8.9 is TCU, SMU. We've got a 8.8 for Iowa State, Iowa. So a lot of these games that we've talked about here. 8.5 for Oklahoma State, Arkansas. 8.4 for Kansas State, Tulane. So again, we've touched on all those games before. Here's a couple we haven't touched on yet that round out, scoring an 8 or better would be at an 8.3. And Philip, I know you're probably going to want to talk about this. Oklahoma State, South Dakota State to start the year, the number 1 power rated FCS team in my version 1 FCS numbers. And then the final game that scores over an 8 in watchability for non-conference only, of course, is West Virginia at Pitt. And I mean, you don't need any added incentive to watch that game. It's going to be a ton of fun, I imagine, in week 3. So those are I think that was 10 games that score a 8 or higher on my watchability, which many people listening probably know this, but just to clarify for those that don't, that is not a prediction or a projection on eyeballs, viewership, how big a fan base is, how big a brand is. That is strictly looking at 2 things. What is the average quality of the 2 teams involved? What's their average K-Ford rating? And what is the projected competitiveness of that game? What's the projected K-Ford spread of that game? And it's weighted. Those are not equal components, but it's weighted. I put that into a model or a formula, and it spits out a number on a 0 to 10 scale, where 10 is the most watchable, 0 is the least. Those are the 10 non-conference games that get at least an 8.0. So I'm excited for all of those for different reasons. And just because I didn't name your team or a game that you like doesn't mean that it's not a highly watchable game. It just didn't quite crack the 8.0.
No. What Kelley just said is nice things about West Virginia, which they're not used to Kelley saying nice things about West Virginia.
That's right. That's right.
Texas Tech at Washington State is a garbage game. Okay. You just
7.7. You just besmirched
Mike Leach.
You just missed it. 7.7. I would never dare besmirch Mike Leach. That man, I know there's been so much conversation around him and the Hall of Fame credentials or lack thereof meeting that bar. I think, and I'm not the only one to say this, but man, if we don't have Mike Leach in the College Football Hall of Fame, I'm not sure what the Hall of Fame, what does it mean? Because there are only a handful of people probably in the last 50 to 60 years that have had a bigger impact, I would say, on the actual playing of football. The way the game of college football is played, only a handful of people have been more impactful in the last half century than Mike Leach. And just because he doesn't have the win percentage required by a couple tenths, thousandths, whatever it is, goodness gracious, if he's not in there, I really don't know what we're doing. But I know that's not the topic of conversation today.
No, yeah, you're welcome to that. No one's going to disagree with you here on that. All right, let's wrap on this because you did mention Oklahoma State as South Dakota State, which is very much in the not going to get credit for winning that game, but you're definitely not going to get credit if you lose that game. So let me ask you on a very unique question I did not prepare you for here. Let's take this most important from a last angle of games you don't want to lose because doing so can harm the reputation of the Big 12, right? We're talking teams with high expectations that lose. I go back to the COVID season where Kansas State and Iowa State lost to Arkansas State and I forget the other one. What are a couple games that you would look at in the Big 12 non-con slate and say, don't lose these games?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably almost all of them, right? Like if you're not mentioning one of these top games, if you lose one of these ones outside of it, that is going to hurt. I'll just take it with just the top contenders. So if we look at Kansas State, obviously if you lose to FCS UT Martin, that is catastrophic. You probably don't even want to lose to Tulane. And I know we just got done saying how Tulane might be the G5, AQ into the CFP, but they're power rated number 60 for me. It is on the road for Kansas State, so that could be tricky, but you don't want to lose to a non-power conference team. So that's probably a good blanket statement. You don't want to lose to somebody who's not in the Power 4. So putting that out there, then let's look at the Power 4 games. I mean, Utah, you don't want to lose to Baylor. It's a non-conference game, but Baylor, and I'm sorry, I know they're a Big 12 team, they are not projected to be, contending for a spot in Arlington this year or in the playoff. I have a number 51 in the power ratings. So you don't want to lose that as a Utah team that's contending for a spot in Arlington. Kansas, you don't want to lose at Illinois. Illinois is number 64. I know it's on the road, but my numbers right now give you a 74% chance to win that game. If Kansas is serious about making a run to Arlington, that's the kind of game that you can't lose. And I know it doesn't hurt their actual record towards getting to Arlington, but that would be very detrimental, I think, in the eyes of many, because Illinois probably not going to have a winning year, if I had to guess, in the Big Ten. Maybe a winning year. They won't have a great year in the Big Ten, so that's a game you want to avoid losing. And then let me see quickly, Arizona, there's really nothing there of note that's not already captured. Oklahoma State, they're in there. You don't want to lose to Arkansas. I know we said they might not get a lot of credit for winning that game because Arkansas's record, but if you lose it's probably pretty detrimental, even though that is a Power 4 team. So, I mean, really, if you're not in those top, 8 or 9, 10 games that we talked about, if you lose those, that probably is going to be detrimental. And here's why, Philip, I believe this to be true. It's not necessarily anything that Big 12 did, but the national perception is, yes, it's a Power 4, but it's a Power 2, right? It's the SEC, it's the Big 10, and then who from the Big 12, who from the ACC can come crash this party, and can one of those conferences get multiple teams in? That's more the storyline. And so if you're losing games in the non-conference, and I'm not saying the math supports this 100%, but the perception would be, if these Big 12 teams, these contending teams, can't beat X, can't beat Y in the non-conference, why should we think they're going to be able to beat team number 5 from the SEC in the playoff, right? Like, that's what that logic is going to be like for national media members, for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, if I had to guess. So it's not fair. I don't totally agree with it, but I think that's the reality. And the Big 12, the ACC are a little bit playing catch up from the get-go because of the perception of the Big 10 and the SEC.
The Big 12 needs to up its non-con scheduling game, because when you limit the opportunities against opponents, people go, oh, I understand you have to win those games, but if you're going to build easier non-con slates, you're going to give yourself fewer opportunities for wins that can boost the conference as a whole. You don't need a lot of them. If you could have you got 16 teams. If you have 4 or 5 games in a season, 3 or 4 where they go, okay, like this is why we keep talking about West Virginia, Penn State. If West Virginia somehow upsets Penn State, the impact of that, not just for West Virginia, but for the Big 12 as a whole, is huge. Now, unless Penn State goes in 4-8, like, sure. But the Big 12 has got to get with the teams and say, we need you to be willing to schedule some games that can make people go, oh, when you win them. We need a few more of those. Kelley, as always, it is an absolute pleasure and an absolute joy to have you on the show. I know every time I do, I get great response from it. People love when you come on the show. You've become a very popular guest. Surprise. Who'd have thought that people would like you, except for West Virginia fans. They don't hate you. But Kelley, do me a favor. Remind everyone, and because every podcast is someone's first, where can they check out all the incredible work you do covering college football?
Absolutely, Philip. Well, like I said at the beginning, I love coming on. It feels like home here. I love talking Big 12. It's one of my favorite conferences. It is my favorite Power 4 conference race this year, certainly. You can find me on X at KFord Ratings. You can find me on the website, kfordratings.com. That's where I really post all my content. One or both of those places. So I really appreciate it, Philip. And hey, man, as we speak, time of recording here, at Ears Nation. Don't know who they are. At Ears Nation just followed me. I'm assuming that's a West Virginia person, and they hadn't even heard the positive things I was saying about West Virginia yet. So I think we are mending fences in the West Virginia community. Man, that grudge has been going on for multiple years now. I'm ready to turn the page, West Virginia fans. So please, let's move past, what was it, like the 2022 preseason where they got after me a little bit. Like, let's turn the page. Let's be excited together about West Virginia's place among these teams that have a chance, in my view, to make it to Arlington here in 2024.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.